the vocation to pray always is really the vocation to become another Christ. And what I'd like to point out here is the way in which Meister Eckhart, who was a Dominican, by the way, which is a mendicant. So mendicants, for those who are not sure, monastics are those who are cloistered, and their whole vocation is to live within a monastery, and they take what's called a vow of stability, and rarely, if ever, leave for the rest of their lives, unless there's some reason within the order they need to do that. A mendicant, like Dominicans and Franciscans, Carmelites, for example, have one foot in the monastery and one foot in service of the world in some way or another. So they're religious orders who are not bound to a monastery, although they have some kind of communal monastic life of some sort, and yet have some vocation in the world. And of course, for the Dominicans, that was preaching. This is what they were and are known for. So we have to understand there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek debate going on here within and among religious orders when Meister Eckhart, 13th, 14th century Dominican mystic, decides to take on the history of monasticism and reclaim that passage from the Gospels, which talks about Mary and Martha. And I want to read that passage to you just so that we all are aware of what it is I'm referring to. And that's on page 154, where I quote the actual biblical text coming out of Luke 10, chapter 38 to 42. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried about this and distracted by many things. There is need only of one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her." So, of course, monastics get a hold of this and say, "We're the Marys, and the rest of you are Marthas, distracted by many things, but we're the ones sitting blissfully at the feet of Christ," right? And so this is how this has consistently. Now, in the book, I do unpack a few different ways this was handled, and there's very creative exegesis around the text. But that is the prevailing message, which is that monastic bias we've been hearing about that I mentioned that really has informed the monastic tradition. So, not being a monastic, but being a mendicant, having one foot in the world, he decides to take it back. He's like, no, you guys don't get to have the final say on this. And so he offers, full disclosure, if Meister Eckhart attempted this interpretation in my historical critical exegesis class, he would fail. So just to put that out there. But I give him an A for creativity. It's my favorite. He's just awesome in the way he does this. And essentially, I explained it in great detail in the book, but I'll just try to summarize it for you as best I can without having to read through it. He basically says, look, in a written text, it's impossible to discern intonation. And we've all been through this, where you send a text and somebody's offended. You're like, no, that's not what I meant. You couldn't carry the tone of humor and it came across as an insult, right? So we know how this can happen. And he says, look, you monastics are not hearing the intonation between Jesus and Martha. They're all talking tongue-in-cheek, right? So he says, look, what's motivating Mary, because see, for Meister Eckhart, he says the greatest Christian virtue is not love, believe it or not, it is detachment. And why is it detachment? Because as long as we're attached to something, to anything, we can't love perfectly. Right? This is what we call a dispassionate love in the monastic tradition. Right? As long as we have conditions, it's not a perfect love. So he says detachment is like a blank page. Now, once you write something on that page, it's committed. Right? It might be a beautiful poem, but then that's it. The page can't host anything else because it's a beautiful poem. And he says, so detachment is this blank slate, what he'll ultimately call the wayless way, right? So he says, look, Mary, though noble, was still attached to something. And what is she attached to? The bliss of her meditation. the bliss of sitting at the feet of Christ, the bliss of her contemplative practice. Now, when the knock came on the door, the mature contemplative, the older Martha, was able to detach from her desire for prayer and serve what Eckhart calls the dear guest Christ, who's in her midst. What he says Mary, the mature contemplative, has the capacity to do is exactly what I'm trying to explain, to embody her prayer. And that means to live a life of radical detachment, even at times to detach from the practice of prayer itself, when that attachment is preventing you from doing the loving thing in that moment. Example, I'm in meditation and the doorbell rings. I'm instantly irritated because can't you see that I'm trying to be a loving person in the world and you're destroying my moment, right? So the idea is, oh, there's a parishioner in need. Oh, there's somebody. So can I have the detached grace to set aside my meditation in that moment and attend to the dear guest Christ who says, my dog just died, or my husband just lost his job, or whatever, and is sobbing up my front porch. Okay. Oh, come in. Let me make you some tea. All right. This is what Martha does. Now, Eckhart extols this as the mature contemplative, in which he is tongue-in-cheek critiquing monastic interpretations of this and opening the way for the kind of contemplative life those of us here feel called to. One that is not monastic, but knows how to hold our practice lightly, and to, in that, find the detachment we need to love perfectly. Now, this can easily become a slippery slope to, I don't need to meditate. And I'm not saying that, do not quote me for having said that, but to know how to hold it lightly. To know how to, it's just like the Good Samaritan. Right? When your religious observations become the thing that prevents you from doing the most loving thing, it's time to let it go. Those rules are meant to be broken. Right? As Jesus says, the Sabbath is made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. The moment religion and its rules and regulations become oppressive and restrictive, it's time to let them go. Maybe not permanently, maybe not forever, maybe not always, but here and now, absolutely. So when I'm a contemplative in the world, dedicating myself to 2 sits a day or whatever that looks like for you, and in the midst of that, the dear guest Christ comes into my midst, can I, with all the grace necessary, set aside my rigidity of this is prayer time to no, I'm being summoned not to stop praying, but to embody prayer for the person who is in need. Do you see the difference? Right? So, this is essentially, there's more detail there, but this is essentially what he is suggesting is how we should be interpreting. Now, the reason he would fail if he submitted this as a paper is because he's not sticking close enough to the text. There's nothing in the text that would indicate that we're not understanding there. But this is creative exegesis, and I love him for it. I mean, it's brilliant because he's really trying to make the point that I'm suggesting here, which is beautiful. If you would turn with me to page 159. Maximus Confessor, one of the great patristic writers, has a beautiful analogy about attachment. And he basically says, even the smallest string tied to the leg of a sparrow will prevent her from taking flight. This is why Eckhart is so much about detachment, because the slightest thing that holds us back, that prevents us from taking flight, from loving freely and with abandon. The slightest attachment can hold us back from that. I want to kind of conclude here in 159 with Eckert's exegesis by showing you how he summarizes his point. So I'm in the last paragraph on 159 before the quote. By contrast, Mary's, so he was comparing this to Martha, and he talks about this idea, by the way, of living without a why, but by which he means don't ask. You don't need to have a why. When the dear guest Christ comes to your home, you just do what love demands in the moment. You love as love demands. So by contrast, Mary's contemplation of Jesus' words indicates that she still possesses desire. Namely, she desires the bliss that comes from sitting at the Master's feet. This may well be a pure desire, but it is desire nonetheless. And because of this, she is still not purely detached and thus still not entirely free. To interject an insight from Maximus Confessor, even the smallest string tied to the leg of a sparrow prevents her from taking flight. So as Mary sits on the ground, Martha, he says, is taking flight. For her and those who are truly detached, Eckert has this to say: here, God's ground is my ground, and my ground is God's ground. Here I live from my own as God lives from his own. Out of this inmost ground, all your works should be wrought without a why. I say truly, as long as you do works for the sake of heaven or of God or for eternal bliss from without, you are at fault. It may pass muster, but it's not the best. In other words, if you are motivated by anything other than detached pure love, it'll pass. You'll get yourself to heaven, but it's not really what it's about. Right? He's being very cheeky here, right? He's saying, so if your motivation for being good is fear of condemnation, as we've all been taught so many times, or I want my cookie at the end of life, what Richard Rohr calls the exit strategy of I want my reward right at the end, well, yeah, you'll be a good person, but you're missing the kingdom here and now. You're missing the love of Christ here and now. You're missing the very incarnatio continua, the continuation of incarnation here and now. Don't bypass this life hoping or waiting for the reward in the next. It's already here. That is what Jesus means when he says the kingdom of God is among you. Live it. Embody it. That is our joy as Christians, right? To live it now. So he becomes rather controversial then, where he actually says at times the very thing we need to let go of is prayer itself. And I say that again with a degree of trepidation, because the whisper, the half-truth that might seep into your mind after hearing me saying that is, you don't really need to meditate. You don't really need to contemplate. You don't really need to do your sit. That's the half-truth you'll hear. But the whole truth is, we need to do that inner work. As much as, the potter centers the clay on the wheel, you can let go of that once it's centered for a little while, but if that wheel keeps spinning, slowly that thing starts getting less and less stable and flies right off the wheel. So you have to apply that effort, what I call actively becoming passive. Right? It's a striving toward active passivity is our prayer. Meaning that we just apply enough pressure to center. It can go for a while, but if you wait too long, it's going to get all cockeyed. So you got to come back to the inner work. If you look then on page 160, the middle paragraph of the citation, what is the prayer of the heart that has detachment? And to answer it, I say that purity in detachment does not know how to pray, because if someone prays, he asks God to get something for him, or he asks God to take something away from him. But a heart in detachment asks for nothing, nor has it anything of which it would gladly be free. So it is free of all prayer, and its prayer is nothing else than for uniformity with God. the point he's making is that even our prayer is a means to an end, not the end itself. So don't make it an end. This is where icons become idols, where windows to the divine become obstacles, walls. So practice your faith, embody it, but learn what it means to let it go when love demands. This is the key of what he's saying. For those on Zoom, what Dan is saying is that the prayer of gratitude is a prayer without expectation. It's just a prayer of being, for what is, without expectation and attachment and so on. So yes, I would concur for sure.
Well, okay, then you're saying that the welcoming prayer would be similar to that, or welcoming of the situation or whatever you're in.
Right. I mean, I think when Father Keating introduced the welcoming prayer, what he's really trying to get us to do is to move into the realm of ascetical practice in a very simple way, which is, oh, I've got a flat tire and I'm late for the airport and I need to be in Orlando, and wow, am I stressed and I just, So how do I welcome that situation and say, there's nothing I can do, and how do I just trust that somehow I'll get where I need to be or whatever, right?
I can give you the line for that, and that is God is in charge. I heard a lot of that this afternoon.
Indeed. God is in charge. Indeed. And it's hard to let that go, right? It's hard to let God be in charge. I understand that. I think I mentioned to some of you that one of the possible titles of my next book is Type A Contemplative. So we can see that in a sense how many of us struggle with that letting go. I want to come back to a quote that somebody, I think it was you who asked me about, that's on the front cover, and I said that I would come to it in this last presentation. It's on page 90, but it's also, it might also be, it's on the front cover of your packet as well. And this is important to follow up on Eckart's exegesis, to make sure I'm balancing the importance for you of sitting in prayer and knowing that I'm not just giving you carte blanche sort of excuse not to meditate. I write this: a spiritual truth to which our culture and society have so successfully numbed us is that the contemplative life is not a luxury or a quaint pastime, but a matter of grave spiritual, social, and now even planetary urgency. Contemplatives know this intuitively. The prayer of silence that confronts the tyranny of the false self and opens us to the transforming power of the Spirit is a moral imperative. I'm not sure that it's the church's job to transform the world. It's the church's job, it's our job to transform our own hearts so that we can become agents of another way, right? Of the way of Christ. So we have a lot of work cut out for ourselves in terms of how we negotiate that little space that Macarius talks about of our own heart, how we face those dragons, those demons, those angels, those saints that we meet there. But I do want to make that point that especially those of you who are asking as you move into retirement or older age, where you're noticing physical capacities diminishing, limitations, and so forth, health conditions coming up, please do not forget the importance of what it is for you to be a meditator, a prayer for the world. Just like the prayer houses of monasteries, it is so essential that you take seriously your capacity, the freedom you have with your life as commitments fall away, to really enter more fully into a state of prayer on behalf of the world. It is a gift that I think is greatly misunderstood and underappreciated, but is urgent, because doing the inner work that I have to do that allows the Christ light to shine more greatly through me is the way the world is transformed. I can't change you. I can't change much of what's happening in the world, but I can work on how I can transform. And this is why I say that the vocation of the Christian is not to be good. It's to become God. Deification, right? I don't mean that in the unqualified sense, but to be a member of Christ's body. And one of the analogies that I give for that I think is so important around the question of humility, as I alluded to earlier, that humility is not what most of us have been taught, which is I'm terrible at everything and I'm no good and I'm unworthy, and somehow that by repeating that trope, I'm a holy person. Real humility, as I like to think of it, is seeing the truth about oneself and admitting it. It's very easy because of how we're enculturated to admit of the things I'm not good at, but harder to admit of the things that I am.